Right, thank you so much for coming, Tara. Thank you everyone for coming, because it's a rotten hell night. And we're delighted. This is our first kind of in-person event that we've had in 2 years. So it's kind of like we're, it's almost like we've never done it before, because we can't remember how to do it, because we got so used to online. So if you don't know, Tara has a YouTube channel. She is also an author, a singer, and she's currently an artist in residence with An Táin in Dundalk. So I'm going to ask you about the YouTube channel and how that first came about, and also something that people may know or may not know and might be curious about. But your YouTube channel is called Diary of a Ditch Witch.
Yes.
And I want to know, what is a ditch witch? And why is that the name of your channel?
Well, I did sort of just make it up. It was back when I was living beyond in Carlingford and writing novels, and I needed a pen name. And at the time, I thought that pen names that had initials in them sounded cooler than ones that didn't. So I thought, well, what are my initials going to be? And it was kind of an in-joke with some friends of mine that I'd go to the shop, which was 5 minutes away, for milk, and it'd take me 3 hours to get home again, because I'd go a wee bit up the mountain, and then I'd see something and I'd want to go investigate that, and 2 hours later I'm crawling through gorse bushes, just because I don't want to double back on myself coming home. I really hate doubling back on myself. So this ditch witch thing was just something somebody said once, and it was like a private joke when I started using it as my pen name then. But it was another couple of years before. It was really with lockdown, everybody was kind of turning to YouTube for content and for people to entertain them, myself included. I relied quite heavily on it at times, and Andy Murphy's videos as well were going strong, the live Irish myths, and just feeling really inspired. And I'm always doing creative things myself anyway, and I thought, I'll give this whole YouTube thing a go and see how it goes. And it was actually originally, I think my first video was making a sheep's wool rug. I was on Facebook one night and I'd been hearing about the plight of Irish farmers having to burn their wool because it was being wasted, it was being burned because it wasn't paying them to sell it when they were done processing it on their end. And I saw some guy had 3 bags of it for sale in Monaghan, and just on a whim I sent him a message and asked could it be sent through the post, and he said it could. And a few days later these 3 bags full of wool lands to my door. I goes, oh my God, what am I going to do with this now? I didn't even have a bathtub to wash it in, or, so I thought, well, sure, this can be my first video now. I'll record this. People will get a kick out of it, even if it goes terribly wrong. And it wasn't too long then before, as we all did, I started to go a wee bit stir crazy in the house. I needed to get out for a walk, and with the 5-kilometre restrictions, someone recommended to me the Famine Graveyard, which is just on the outskirts of Dundalk, and that was within my 5k radius. And when I went up to it, I went, oh my God, it's so magical. It feels like hallowed ground at times up here. So I wanted to share that with people, just as a bit of relief for people who couldn't get out for a walk as well. And that was so popular when I did it. Everybody loved me giving out a wee bit about the history and talking a wee bit about folklore, because we definitely got lost, and it was definitely the fairies' fault. So it kind of just took off from there. It was a reason to have a laugh and kind of learn something while you were doing it, which personally is one of my favourite ways to learn. So it kind of started from there. I started doing more site visit videos, and then when I couldn't get out to do those, I was researching things and just putting out videos about interesting aspects of Irish culture mainly, but anything that's a wee bit witchy as well. So it's kind of a cover-all term for anything I'm up to, basically, is the long version of the answer there, Lisa.
I think the Famine Graveyard was actually the first video of yours that I saw, and I was fascinated because that's somewhere that I didn't know. And I know there was a lot of people, Ailish, who works here, that is a walk that she does up that way, and she said in lockdown, she said it's like everyone else discovered it, and she was really annoyed because she was like, this is my place.
That was partially my fault, so sorry, Ailish.
That's okay, I'm sure she'll forgive you. So you're currently an artist in residence with An Táin, and you're focusing on the epic poem of the same name. Can you tell us a little bit about that, where your focus is going to be and what you're actually working on?
Yes, well, what I'm working on...
secret?
No, it's certainly not. It just, I mean, it hasn't even really been decided on yet, but it's my residency is kind of this process of discovery. Mm-hmm. So basically, I'm delving into the Táin Bó Cuailnge. It's been a great opportunity to do it because, I mean, do you know, I was always into myths and legends as a child, and when I come on a bit then, that brought me into a bit of philosophy and Carl Jung and psychology and all that kind of thing. And archetypes really, essentially. And like Cuchulainn, obviously you can't be from Dundalk without your ears pricking up at the mention of Cuchulainn's name. But anytime I tried with the Táin Bó Cuailnge, I just found it so hard to penetrate. I didn't understand like the storytelling devices that are used throughout it and the reasons why it seems to be kind of rambling all over the place. And then you'd be reading it and it says things like, well, Maeve, you had a fantastic bull, but it didn't want to be ruled by a woman, so it crossed over into your husband's fields instead. And I'm like, throw the book away. Like I couldn't. I found it really, really, really hard to get into it, and we didn't read it in school either. So, when it came to doing my videos, then it was getting harder and harder to avoid really talking about it. And then when I saw the opportunity for the residency in An Táin Arts Centre in Dundalk, I thought, this is my chance. I'm gonna just get absolutely stuck into it now. And kind of by that time, I'd gone nibbling a wee bit round the edges, and I'd started learning about the importance of the origin of place names to Irish storytelling. So there are entire scenes in the Táin Bó Cuailnge which are literally just explaining why a certain stone's called a certain thing, or that sort of thing. And it makes a lot more sense when you read it, knowing that. And then I watched Laura O'Brien's kind of read along of, I think it was Cecil O'Rahilly's translation of the Táin that Laura did, and started to understand that maybe Queen Maeve wasn't quite the vain, arrogant, promiscuous woman that she'd been made out to be, that actually maybe there was kind of a legal justification for her starting on the cattle raid of Cooley, that to come into a marriage as equal to your husband, or even having greater assets than your husband, that very much changed the whole dynamic and the nature of your marriage in the eyes of Brehon law, which it would have been under at the time. So it was actually when Aliel called her into question and says, you know, I reckon you're better off now than you were before you married me, that was actually challenging her right to be like, you know, the sovereign queen of Connacht in her own right. And she, you know, she didn't just automatically inherit that. According to the stories, she was chosen from many siblings because she was the highest and haughtiest of them all. So for her husband to kind of come in and go, actually, you might be a kept woman, but that was a very big deal. Like you can't just say that and leave it hang like that, because then does that mean the whole of Connacht then needs to defer to Aliel rather than Maeve on matters to do with the province? Like, so I kind of started to feel from listening to that Maeve had got a bit of a bad deal, and that she certainly seemed to have felt obliged. Now, whatever you'd say about how she went about it after that, and as far as the whole promiscuous thing goes as well, I don't think she was much more promiscuous than some of the non-female figures that appear throughout Irish mythology. But, you know, whatever, the whole friendly ties thing is still iconic, like either way, you know. So that was really it for me. That I was hooked then. Yeah. I was completely suckered in, and I'm just living in the world of the Táin Bó Cuailnge at the minute. What I'm hoping to do, I mean, I could never, like I couldn't, at the end of this residency, basically, I want to put out a video which is that I've left my mark on it in some way, that I've made it more accessible to people, because if you haven't got all this access to all these extra resources or the time to sit down and go through them, you want to know a bit more, but you want to know it in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops kind of thing. So I want to find a way to give it a more modern treatment and see how it would feel in the modern world, and maybe put in some of my kind of trademark, maybe animation, or just maintain the sense of humour that's in it too as well, and really bring that to the fore. So that's what I'm hoping to come out with at the end of all of this. I don't know exactly what form it's going to take yet, but that's, as I say, the process. So
excellent.
Yeah.
You mentioned the archetypes, and I was just wondering, obviously Maeve is, you know, the major female character. The Morrigan is also part of An Táin. Do you think those kind of characters, are they relevant to us now? Are they maybe more relevant than they ever were before?
Totally. Like, I think both Maeve and Morrigan really represent like personal agency and shirking the expectations of the society that you live in, which I think is a crucial part of the evolution of Irish culture and Irish society, and even down to the foundation of the state, you know, like Éru's names all over that. Like Queen Maeve's queenship completely relied on her going against the grain and going what people might have wanted for her, and to me she was a very resourceful woman, and she used the resources that she had to hand in order to maintain her own personal sovereignty, and I think that's something we can really understand today. And then you've got, you know, in slightly more recent times, and she's kind of half historic, half mythical, as Gráinne Mhaol, like Grace O'Malley, causing political ructions all over the place, and reminding us as well, like that story about there always being a place set for her at Roach Castle for dinner every day. Well, that's reminding us about hospitality, and that's something that we tend to sometimes overlook and forget about. And I think at times during unprecedented crises of homelessness and population displacement, that hospitality is something that we need to remember in this country. I've actually been trying to find out, do they still set the place for at Roach Castle every day? I'm finding it very hard to get through to Roach Castle, so if anyone here has any connections, talk to me afterwards.
So not being very hospitable.
Not being very well, I mean, you know, you give them the grace for lockdown and that, but I mean, then, you know, like in more recent times, like we, you know, young rebels or rebels in the making in Ireland today might be inspired by the likes of Common the Man. They were inspired by Éru. Do you know, like, and then the Morrigan, the shapeshifter, like she takes on different guises nearly every time she appears throughout the stories. And if that's not relatable today, when one woman has to be so many different faces for all the different aspects in our life, like you have to be tender, soft, loving, teaching, nurturing mommy when you're at home, and then you have to put on corporate queen face and go into work and own it, like. So, you know, I think in these days, Morrigan was, you know, she didn't really give a flip what people thought about all her many guises. That wasn't really on her level of thinking. She was just fulfilling her role within society, her very unique role within these tales, as I think a lot of women are these days, by shirking the expectations, by not conforming to and allowing themselves to be pigeonholed. That we can be many, many things, and in fact I think we should be celebrated as having superpowers for being able to do that,
so many different
rather
things,
than being expected to whittle it down to one generic marketing thing. Do you know, like, I mean, the things I've done over the years have been a complete nightmare to market, like, but maybe the marketing has it wrong. Maybe we shouldn't be pigeonholing in the way we have been.
Well, you're definitely someone who's able to do, like, I mean, I don't know how you manage to be so many different things. I mean, you're a writer, a singer.
Lots of cups of tea and lots of lies down in darkened rooms to recalibrate and readjust, you know.
Good.
And I'm sure a lot of women here can empathise with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask about another very important character who straddles both the pagan world and the Christian one. Very important to people in Louth, and especially in North Louth, and that's Bridget.
Yes.
And I think she's a bit of a favourite of yours, isn't she?
She is indeed. And you mentioned as well, when you were giving me the questions, about her being somebody who isn't afraid to use deception and violence as an archetype, which is a little bit, well, we tend to think it's unusual when it comes to like Christian saints, but is it really? Like the nuns who taught me in primary school, whilst they were warning us about the moral evils of the Spice Girls and girl power, they still saw fit to teach us about Bridget poking her own eyeball out to avoid a marriage to a man that she didn't want to marry because she had a grander vision in mind, to go down and establish her abbey, her convent in Kildare, and she wasn't going to let anyone get in her way, you know. And I think the lesson, like the other thing is, that's really only I mean, that's one way of looking at it, that was using violence and using deception on the King of Leinster with our cloak and things like that. That's only deception if you don't believe in magic and miracles and the will of God as well, you know, because who's to say it wasn't all God's doing, and Bridget just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I mean, you know, like a lot of different pantheons will have some form of a trickster energy, which I think in many ways Bridget kind of exemplifies for us. But all of the characters in the Irish pantheon do, like, we don't have two-dimensional characters the way a lot of other pantheons do. You'd have, like, you know, the goddess of love, the goddess of war, that kind of thing. We don't have that. We have a pantheon full of three-dimensional characters who all have many aspects to their personalities and who are all kind of vying for the spotlight as well. They're a very colourful bunch, and it's the trickster energy kind of pops up everywhere. Like, deception is used constantly across the board. But then, I mean, in modern times, that tends to make me think of the likes of, like, I noticed there, like, Sinead O'Connor has been in the news a lot recently, and it's 30 years this year since she ripped up the picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live. She had to lie to the producers of Saturday Night Live about the picture she was going to bring on with her in order to do that. But I thought it was very allowed. Exactly, and reading about it, Sinead actually says herself that picture to her represented lies and liars. And that was in the very, very early days of the church abuse scandals. Like, the lid hadn't really been blown on it, certainly not the full extent of it at that stage. So Sinead had to tell a little lie in order to uncover, or at least do her part in uncovering much bigger lies. And then women who escaped from the Magdalen laundries, they used deception. They would have used any method that they needed to in order to do that. So, you know, as far as like violence or deception, I think that might come to mind when we think of some of Bridget's tricks, say, for example. I think as long as, like, violence obviously then is a learned behaviour as well. So I think as long as women or anyone is facing the threat of deception and violence, I think our archetypes, you know, there's going to be demand for archetypes that take that into account. So yeah, I you know, you've got in recent years, it's like systemic violence is only actually still being written out of law in Ireland. Do you know, like 1996, the closing of the last laundry, divorce was legalised. You've got 2018 and the bill that was brought in for the termination of pregnancy. 2019, coercive control within relationships.
Being made illegal,
And whilst it's being written out of law, like even this year, like joggers and walkers are still afraid for their safety. So
absolutely,
I can see why people are identifying so strongly with Bridget. Still, I can see why she's such a timeless icon. And you know, I think as long as there is a need for that, as long as that's still happening in society, there's always going to be a need
still
for
relevant.
it. Absolutely.
And do you think is there anyone maybe that's less famous? Like, we all know who Bridget is, we all know who Maeve is. Is there anyone from mythology that maybe we need to start reading about again? Rediscover.
All of them. And look into your local history, your local myth, your local folklore. And if there's somebody who takes your interest, go digging. We have great collections. You've got like the schools collection on the Dukas website, collected in the 1930s, which is talking about local folklore, local stories, place names, that kind of thing. Then you've got UCC Celt, which is a great archive for all of the mythology. You've got, where else? JSTOR is a great place for getting academic papers. You've got, I think when it comes to, like, Laura O'Brien has written a great book on Queen Maeve. She's also delved a lot into Morrigan. Annie Murphy has written a monograph on Boan, and has done an excellent video on Eru as well, who, as far as we know, only actually appeared twice in all the mythological stories that we have. But Anthony has done a great video on his Mythical Ireland YouTube channel as well. So go digging, go looking. I mean, me personally, I want to know more about Scahawk as well, who was, now she was over on the Isle of Skye, but she is mentioned in I think it's in the Remscale of An Táin Bó Cuailnge. She was a warrior on the Isle of Skye, where an awful lot of Ireland's greatest warriors were sent to be trained. So I don't really know very much about her. I want to go and learn more. And I mentioned Cuailnge earlier too. I definitely, there's more of an opening. And there's a few more Irish pirate queens as well. There was Anne Bonny too. So I want to go and I want to learn about all of these. So I maybe try and get more residencies so I can spend several months doing that.
Absolutely, yeah, that would be ideal. And I wanted to know who your biggest influence would be.
Yeah, well, on a day-to-day basis, when it comes to gods and archetypes, I try not to pay them too much attention because they know they exist and they don't need me encouraging them. But I have worked a lot with Bridget over the years, especially when it comes to matters of like the home or housing and professional matters as well. And then when it comes to issues of sovereignty or issues of kind of like lasting cultural icons, I'll often come to Eru. Like that's, I mean, they're probably the two main ones for me. Excellent. I've also, in my own study in my local history and folklore, I've recently discovered Rohesia de Verdun. So she's kind of semi-historical, kind of legendary figure, and she's made out to be this black widow type. And she built, it's another one of my videos that I did, but she built Roach Castle, which is just outside of Dundalk town, and it's the only castle standing in Ireland at the minute to have been built by a woman. And you want to see it. Like she was a femme sole in sort of Anglo-Norman society. So she was a widow, her husband had died, and that left her a little bit vulnerable when it came to her possessions, her legacy that she could leave to her children and stuff like that. And she didn't really want to get married again and be kind of sold off like a broodmare for the sake of her own security. So she paid a big fine. Again, she could only do that because she was a rich woman. But she became a femme sole, which kind of gave her autonomy in her own right then. And you want to see Roach Castle, like the defences on it, there's these two big barrel towers on the front of it that there's no penetrating, and that was like the front line between the Raiden Gaels to the north and the Anglo-Irish to the south. So, there had been a few generations of her family had landed before her with the Anglo-Norman invasion, but none of them had managed to build a castle that could actually withstand both the Gaels and attacks from other factions. So Rohesia was the first to do that, and there's a fair bit about her and her life up on the internet. She actually ended up building a monastery over in Leicestershire in England and spent the rest of her days there. Again, was religious life just a way for women to kind of gain status and be left alone within society. So even that, I think, was possibly a bit of a power move, and it meant then that her sons were free to inherit all of her stuff. But she's not quite a mythological figure, but she has been painted as this. She didn't want to get married again, but she did offer, apparently, to marry a man who could design her the castle that would withstand all of these constant attacks. And the legend goes that on their wedding night, she pushed him from one of the highest windows so that A, she wouldn't have to stay married to him, and B, the secrets of the castle would die with him or would die with her. And the so-called murder window is still there as well. So if you do go to visit Roach Castle, it's an incredibly dangerous site. Keep your wits about you. Tell a friend you're going. But do pay a visit now that it's all open up again. It's definitely worth the trip if you can get a spin down. So
excellent. Well, I'm going to ask everyone else if they have some questions for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to ask, I'm probably just going to comment in a general way as well. It's lovely to hear, first of all, a woman speak around Irish mythology, because obviously we know Anthony and, I'll never say his name right, Moncon. And I have asked him actually on Twitter, like a great Twitter sphere, who are the women's voices in Irish mythology and history, and he said, well, there isn't really there are a lot of women, but nobody to the forefront kind of bringing women's voices. So I think it's really lovely to hear you, because as much as it's great to have other people do it, but I think from a woman's point of view, it's lovely because you will look for different things, I think. And draw out different.
Totally. Also check out Laura O'Brien's YouTube channel, and there are many books. And Morgan Daimler, although Morgan is based in the States, but has written an extensive collection of what the Pagan Portal series, which covers a lot of the particularly female figures throughout Irish mythology. So I'd recommend checking both of those out for more female voices when it comes to Irish myth. Thank you very much.
An Táin Bó Cuailnge, again, wasn't done in school. I didn't know anything about it. Really know very little about it as well, but it was translated, wasn't it, from Irish by a woman, first of all. Was it Lady Jane Watt?
Well, Lady Gregory did a version of it, and there were several men translated it as well. So yeah, there's a multitude out there, but again, trying to pick and choose between them and put one coherent story together. Like, we wouldn't say Lady Gregory would be the best of the translations either, you know. But if more women had done it, maybe we might have had a better one. Maybe one of these years Laura might give it a lash. I don't know, but I mean, there's the language barrier. You know, trying to get into the Old Irish or Middle Irish, like it's a lot. I think you really need to be into your ancient languages in order to go to that level with it. But Lady Gregory flying the flag for us, and still worth a read, still worth people looking at. You know, she's a great storyteller all the same. So yeah. Thanks for that. Minori Rain, Trials and Tribulations, and it was kind of coming of age for sort of witchy young women, when you're just a bit different, when you're a bit creative, and you've maybe had some stuff happen to you that hasn't really happened to your friends, and you don't really know who to talk to about it. I kind of thought I wanted to write a sort of a roadmap, the book that I didn't have when I was younger, to just be like, look, it might seem really awful at the minute, but amazing things can happen. So magic is just around every corner. And the novella I co-wrote then with, I sort of started a publishing company a few years back to make the whole self-publishing ordeal a little bit less of an ordeal, and I had a partner in that. And we co-wrote a novella which was called Idiot Sticks, which I have been pulled up as it's been very ableist behaviour, which ableist language, which it probably is. So I don't promote it too much, but it's a very enjoyable story, I think, about a bit of a hapless Aegis from County Meath who wants to impress his girlfriend on his daddy's credit card and ends up stumbling through a gorse bush and accidentally time travels back to the Iron Age and falling in with a band of Féinid like Fianna, and then he has to find his way back out. And in the meantime, there's also a threat of Romans coming over and sussing to see what's the situation in Ireland. And Josh takes it upon himself to try and do something about this now, because he's heard of these Romans and he knows they're bad news. So that's the three books that I've put my name to so far, and I think I would like to write more, but I'd probably want to get a publisher sorted first, because it's an awful lot of work trying to self-publish and distribute and promote and write. Then on top you have to keep the writing going, and yeah, it was kind of untenable. So I moved on to my music then for a while after I write songs as well, and put out an old EP and messing around at a lot of things for a lot of years, and kind of feeling at times like maybe I was wasting my time. And then I started a YouTube channel and they all came together in this much more coherent way. So if you do feel a wee bit all over the place, don't worry about it, it'll come together eventually, you know.
Excellent.
Was it from a childhood, Tara, that this all came about, or is it something that came about like when you were in your 20s, like early kind of, or was it something from childhood that you just were really interested in mythology?
Well, I mean, my gateway drugs, if I could call them that, would have been Enid Blyton, Roald Dahl when I was a kid. When I came into my teens, then it was Terry Pratchett, Anne Rice, and you know, that got me into things like the quests for the Holy Grail and things like that. And the world that I was coming across in books felt more real to me most of the time than the world where I had to get up and go to school every day and learn things I didn't care all that much about. And I mean, I was an alright student. I did my best with the real world, but really, you know, I just wanted escapism the whole time. And when I realised then, kind of growing up, you're kind of made to believe it's a wee bit maybe silly and childish at a certain point then to be living in fantasy worlds. Thankfully, it wasn't too long before I shed those notions and realised that when you grow up, you just call them myths and legends rather than, you know, witches and wizards and magic and that kind of thing. But I like playing between the two as well, because I think it's really important to maintain, like, I think a child's sense of wonder and the way a child will understand archetypes that we can sit down and write a thesis on, you know, for a child to just kind of instinctively understand that, I think there's wisdom in that too. Yeah. We tend to forget that as we get older. So I think they're really, really, really important. And I'm always like the Auntie Tara who's just throwing books at children, like just, I don't care if you don't read all of them, just find one you like and read that author or whatever.
Something will stick.
Something will stick eventually, and it usually does. So in a world where screens are taken over, you know, books are still so important. But, you know, I mean, this is coming from a YouTuber, so what does that mean really? Like, so
I really enjoyed your talk, and I think I grew up in County Galway, and I grew up, you know, and it was growing away and around Bullockhooley and Children of there and the fairy forts, the fairy rings, don't stand, and what road you go on, and the fairies appear, and that was very much, it was with my grandparents, that was very much part of growing up, and kind of, as you said, you go into your adult life and kind of, but it's still there deep down though.
It is.
Still, I would still, if I was walking off, I'd still be conscious of, you don't step in the fairy ring and you don't be disrespectful, or fairy tree there, you leave it alone, you don't take it down. And from listening to you tonight now, what I'm going to go home and do is I'm going to root out those books from being a kid and read the Children of there again.
Yeah.
And all those ones that, you know,
you'll get all the
adult and look at them differently.
You'll get all the new layers of meaning that you didn't get as a child. They're fantastic. And I do think that those tales are an integral part of the Irish psyche. An integral part. I don't think you can separate them. Like, it's what our culture has been founded on, and nearly every aspect of our society. So important. Like,
We're slightly off track now. I love what Brian Carney, The Long Woman's Grave, I know that's not correct, but her history then.
Massively dubious.
Yeah.
There's so many different versions of that story.
And that's a lovely place though.
Oh, it's a fabulous place.
It's a fabulous place.
Well, it's a fabulous place, but apparently she died of shock when she saw it, because she was I want to say a Spanish princess who was brought over by a local chieftain, and he was like, so I'm going to bring you now and show you my lands. And he took her up to what's essentially a barren pile of rock. You can't even really see, like, it's a very magical, mystical spot, and the cloud descends in on it, and I mean, there's drama up there surely. And apparently she took one look at it and fell down dead on the spot, rather than live there. So whatever that tells you about the Windy Gap, you know, and visitors from Spain. But I mentioned it. I did do a video around Ravensdale, which was one of the kind of, I didn't research it too much before I went. I kind of did a lot of it off the cuff, which can go either way. And I did a little animation of that poor princess coming in and falling down dead. In another version of the story, again, as always, female archetypes, she was a super badass, and her and her husband were actually set upon by some of his enemies, and I think she took up a sword and killed him. So, you know, who knows? But again, a multifaceted woman according to all the different versions of the story. So yeah, it's a good one. Another good visiting spot for a Sunday drive.
So many retellings coming out of like mythological women and every retelling of their narratives. Do you feel that, like, in the past, female mythology and the Irish Mythology abroad were kind of set in a negative light for a reason, or was it just like as you're saying, Maeve was seen as promiscuous, but now you look at it deeper and you're like, oh, there's reasons.
The early Irish texts were mostly written down by medieval monks. So that pretty much explains that. You know, there's been an agenda there for as long as we've been writing them down, or at least as long as we have records from. So yeah, you know, the men can go off and lay with kind of whoever they want, and that's just what heroes do. But when women kind of do pretty much the same thing, you're promiscuous, and then sure you're vain and arrogant and all them other things, quarrelsome, you know. All right, yeah, whatever. Thanks, monks. But I mean, give them the credit. They did write it down. If they hadn't written it down, we wouldn't have it. So it was a very good jumping off point that they gave for us. It took us a while to get around, but we're getting there now. Like, we're definitely restoring the balance, I
I think
think.
that we look for so much from those villainous women now.
Yeah.
We're relating more to them than we are to Cullen and...
Honest to God, yeah. Do you know, like, and I mean, show me a woman who was a real villain in Irish mythology. Like, they were just interesting characters, like everybody else was. Did many aspects to them, and I think we've a lot to learn from that too. You know, that's definitely a lesson that's going to be hard learned. That, like I say, it's the difference between like the Irish pantheon, and I have a friend who would have grown up with the Hindu pantheon as well, and she says that we are to have a lot in common because they also have very kind of 3D characters, and they're not as easy to paint as like good or bad, or they just kind of wear what they wear, and depending on the circumstance, depending on the situation, as to what aspect of their personality you would hear about that day. So, you know, yeah, it's great to see it all kind of coming to light now, as I say, the balance being redressed. Yeah.
Dara, can I ask you a question? And it's very interesting to get your perspective on all this, because, you know, YouTube is one thing, but when you're sitting in front of a room of people, it's an entirely different experience.
Yeah.
When I was in school, we were taught by the Christian Brothers, you know, and what I didn't realise at the time was, in essence, we were getting a Catholic education.
Yes.
It was entirely focused on the classical world, first and foremost. Everything good in the world had emerged from Greece and Rome. We learned about the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. We were told nothing of the treasure chest that we had in our own mythology.
Absolutely.
It was actually, I think, intentionally suppressed, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was in secondary school, a decade previously, the Christian Brothers had still been teaching Latin.
Yeah.
And you had to do catechism,
Yeah.
you know. But anyway, that's not the question. That's just me rambling.
That's a very good point, though, Annie.
And so I'm going to really put it up to you now, because I really genuinely want your opinion on this. How do you think that we best might rehabilitate, revivify the archetype of the goddess into the Irish psyche? Away from, or perhaps a little bit detached from, what we might call religion. And so the reason that question is loaded is because at the moment there are a lot of voices who appear to be in the pagan community and who may be seen by some to be proselytizing, trying to convert people.
Yes.
And I think that's a bit of a turn off for people who've had that in their lives and had a bad reaction to it.
Yes.
How do we do it in a way that's not seen as a new version of Bible bashing, you know?
Yes. Well, I'm trying to get people as young as I can. Get them when they're young. And I think looking at what kids coming up are paying attention to these days is a great place to start. Like, I know they say you shouldn't completely let your audience decide what you do, but that is also kind of the nature of YouTube. You wouldn't be doing it if there was nobody watching you. So what is it that the kids want to watch when they click into something? You know, how is it that they're seeking to understand the world around them? And then you meet them where they are and you explain it to them in terms that they understand. Again, I think using humour is a great way of doing it. For me, I enjoy putting like artistic elements into it and animation and things like that, where you can even heighten the humour in it. You basically want to look at the obstacles between understanding all the many aspects of the female archetypes in Irish mythology and just start smashing them down one by one. You know, what is it that's getting in people's ways? What is it that got in our way when we were learning? Like, I still have people, usually men of a certain age, commenting on my channel. Freudian slip there. Freudian slip. So commenting and telling me that like when I do a video about Cuchulainn, you'll have people going, that's not real. Myths and legends aren't real. That's only make-believe. You can hear the words of the Christian brothers coming through their mouth, and almost invariably when you talk to them, they all were taught by Christian brothers, and they were taught that this is make-believe. You know, as you say, it's all right to look back to the classics and to understand things from that perspective, because that's easily homogenized, that's easily broken down and used to certain people's advantages too. You know, that can be like history and myth can be used either way, and history is written by the victor too. So you know, I think YouTube now is offering, and other platforms like it are offering, a direct means of telling stories to people where you don't have to go through the marketing experts, where you don't have to go through the government, you know, or whoever has the say of the day. Like, so it's reaching people directly, and I think it's about making them laugh, it's like Professor Frank, make you laugh, make you think, like. I also think it really, really helps that people's kind of slavery to religion, to organised religion in this country, is crumbling around us currently. So I think the sway that they had over people's minds is really starting to ebb away, and I think it's a great thing. I think people are looking for it now more than ever as well. Like, I think that's probably helps the popularity of all of our channels, is that people are seeking this out. Like, they want to know more, and yeah, it's about giving it to them in bite-sized doses, the way they can understand on their lunch break when they're sitting in work, and they want to, you know, they maybe heard something about, oh, Bridget's Day, we're getting 2 days for that, and then they see a video on their Facebook that looks like it might be a bit funny, looks like it might be a bit interesting, it's only 10 minutes long, sure, go on, like. And you're getting them where they live, where they work, on the road, and I think that's the way to do it, and to just keep battering the doors down until you know, everybody has the same passion for it that we do. Just enforce it on everybody at once. That's certainly what I'm hoping to do with my residency anyway, is that I want to make something that, you know, like to catch people's attention on YouTube, they say there has to be lots of bright colours and lots of things happening. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to just start applying that to Irish myth without having to go through, you know, the expense of getting the Irish Film Board on board to do a massive animated feature-length film. You don't have to do that anymore. You know, you can make funny videos from your kitchen. So yeah, I think it's just about meeting people where they live. I think that's it. But yeah, that was a great question.
Well, one of the principal aims of our duties of the storyteller, of course, the Shanachie, was to entertain.
Of course.
I mean, you can tell the story, you know, from top to bottom, as often as you want, but if you don't make it funny, your audience is just going to walk away. It's actually, people don't realise, it's actually a crucial element of storytelling is to entertain, but obviously in a way that's not kitsch. The other question, which is kind of related to the first question, is in relation to the sovereignty goddess, this idea that the male rulers required the harmony of a good relationship with the goddess. And I just wondered where you sit on that. You know, the Hyros Gamos, you know, the Banishri, the sacred marriage, that, you know, at the end of the day, a king could be brilliant in battle, a king could oversee a plentiful kingdom and all the rest and abundant. But if that relationship wasn't true and right, that could spell absolute disaster. Now, I'm thinking specifically examples. I think you mentioned Morrigan earlier on. Morrigan offered herself to the Dagda, and the Dagda acquiesced. And things worked out very well for the Dadanans because they beat the Fomorians in the Battle of Moytura. But then in the Táin, she offered herself to Cuchulainn, who spurned her, and things didn't work out too well for him in the end. He met quite a brutal and lonely death. And I'm just wondering, how do we incorporate that in, given that, we've had this long period of time where, even the fact that the monks, is there a single example of a manuscript from the medieval period that was written by a nun? That it's all been male dominated. How do we, I don't even know what I'm asking, to be honest.
Yeah.
But do you get where I'm coming from? We've had this, people call it the patriarchy, We've had it in different forms, political, colonial, military, religious. And we look at our stories and we look at Bridget and we see these very, very strong archetypes. But how do we marry that, if you forgive the pun? Is there an aspect of that, of the female giving away her power to the male, or do you see it differently?
Well, thanks for reminding me, Annie, because that's actually one of the bullet points I totally forgot about in the course of this conversation. So, Queen Maeve, if you look at it from the point of view of, and a lot of people do, Queen Maeve being like the key to the sovereignty for the land. So that a king had to marry her and kind of satisfy her conditions. I tend to think more than polarising Queen Maeve and Cuchulainn. I really think An Táin Bó Cuailnge is a story about a husband and wife and a domestic argument that was had one night, and it just went on into the night and nothing to do them then. It had to be put to rights, and so Castle Reda Cooley. But I think Maeve had 3 requirements of her husband, and one of them was that he wouldn't be jealous. I think Alil should have, for a start, I think there needs to be more emphasis placed on he was being a little bit arrogant, which was another of the requirements, when he kind of said, I reckon you're better off now than you were before you married me. I think it's a cautionary tale, to maybe just let good enough be. And if you notice that one of Maeve's better bulls has crossed over into your field, I think I was reading about the 10 degrees of marriage under Brehon law today, and when a man has less wealth, less assets than his wife, that's its own degree of marriage. It's not as good as both of them coming in as equals, but it's there. But he's also meant to consent to the woman's family looking after, it's this whole big, the woman's family's meant to come in and look after the livestock. There's this whole massive complex of rules. Now, I've been threatening to get into Brehon law more so as well. I still haven't done it, but I got back onto you for
there
that.
Are many volumes of it.
Many volumes. We need about 3 more residencies for that as well. So, but yeah, I think that, for me, let's go back to this sort of, mother nature. Okay, so that's female archetype that's understood the world over. Now, I don't think every culture considers nature to be a woman, but a lot of them do. And I think, the female as the receptive, if you want to go traditional about it, she's like the receptacle. So she's the earth, kind of having to just put up with whatever we as the active male dominant sort of force mankind does. I think, stories like the Táin Bó Cuailnge and, like you say, with the Morrigan, and all of the Irish tales got to do with kings having to go through some kind of female deity in order to get the key to the land, the key to the sovereignty, the key to the abundance and the wealth that came along with all of that. Brehon law itself revolved around respect for the earth and that we are only caretakers. You didn't really own the land. And that needs to be remembered. That's one of the biggest things I think we can also learn from these fierce characters, the fierce female characters in our pantheon, is that sometimes they snap back as well. And we're seeing that now with all the storms and things that's coming, because for a couple of 100 years there since industrialisation, we kind of forgot about the one guiding principle, the key to success with the land, which is to bear the receptacle, the female, in mind. So I think that's what you're getting at, is the sort of, there needs to be a marriage, a balance between the two. And it's interesting you say about, the bad luck that Cuchulainn had, but I think everyone's just, people are always looking for reasons to feel sorry for Cuchulainn. Don't feel sorry for Cuchulainn. He was grand, you know, he died a warrior's death, but and he did plenty before he was even 17, if the stories are to be believed. But, you know, I think that was kind of Maeve and Ailill, and before the end of the first chapter, Ailill's back on side helping her to readdress the balance. Because I think he maybe kind of realised, like, oh shit, like, what have I started here now? So right, we better go and get this brown bull from Cooley and make it right again. We need to make it right again when it comes to the earth, when it comes to the tales of the women who have been stewards of it throughout Irish mythology. And yeah, I think that's what we could be focusing on our attention on, and how we could I mean, there's no way to change that the texts we have to go off were all written by males. There's no way to undo that. The best we can do is sort of let the women at it now and see what we can make of it.
Ignore the marginalia and the additional comments.
Don't read the comments, whatever you do.
The less than concealed attempts to Christianise. One last question for me. I'm really sorry for hugging the
Go
question.
ahead, Annie.
The fear around embracing the hag.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Could it be that is merely in a male-dominated environment? The
really
fear
think so.
of giving the woman the power.
Yeah.
You know, because those who embrace it, so, you know, the story of Niall of the 9 hostages and his 4 half-brothers, they all encountered the hag and they all chickened off.
Yeah.
Because she was decrepit and ugly and all the rest.
Yeah.
Niall embraced her and she turned into a beautiful young woman, as you hear in the fairy tales.
Yeah.
And she told him, you are going to be king and your progeny are going to be kings long after you're gone. And is there something about that transformative power of, for the man, stepping back for a moment and saying, it's perfectly okay.
Trust.
For the woman to shine.
Yes.
You know, is there an aspect of, you know, that patriarchy in there somewhere?
I'd argue that in an awful lot of archetypal stories and situations, you'll see a man at the absolute top of his game, the absolute height of his power, and the only thing he has left to fear is a woman. That's a pretty common theme. And I think, like that, an awful lot of the time it's because of this polarising kind of conditioning that we've had for, God, centuries, millennia, who even knows, like. And it is that whole thing that, oh, women can be tricksy and women can be shapeshifty and this sort of thing that, oh, what's that going to mean for me? I don't know. I can't predict all those things, you know. And it does require a leap of faith on the part of men, but sure, so does leaving the house every single day when you're a woman. So, like, I mean,
yeah, don't.
I'm sure you'll cope.
Of course, Christianity insists that it was Eve who started all the trouble. By
indeed,
eating the apple in the first place.
eating her penchant for apples, like, you know.
There's certain suppression, as you say, of female energy, and there always has been, and I think there is that element of men afraid if we let them unleash that energy, are they going to bowl us down and that's the end of men? But I don't think women do that. I think what women do is they bring everybody with them.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
You know, and I had my own International Women's event on Friday in Termfeckin, and we had 8 speakers at it, women of all different backgrounds, and loving the room and wanting to bring and raise everybody up together. And I don't think men necessarily in that sphere do that, you know, and want to bring everybody, because it's just a competitive world out there for a lot of people, like, you know, that's the way it has been. But the energy for women. But the other thing is, I just want to say, was like, there's so much history and there's so much written books that we literally have never heard of half of these stories. And I only got into it recently because of Anthony and looking on his YouTube channel, and he mentioned Eru journals one time, and I actually bought one that was original on the internet. It was 100 years old, and I had all this old Irish and mid-Irish, and I know some Irish, but I love reading the Irish version alongside the English because it just fits well in the tongue, and even if you don't know it, it really does. So how, again, like, to disseminate all those stories, again, people don't realise all the annals that are there. And there's so much written history, like thousands and thousands of books. Irish people just have no idea that it exists, like, you know. So I think it is really important to bring all that out.
Yeah, I'd say there's as many people know about the Horselips album Book of Invasions as have actually read the Book of Invasions, you know, if not possibly more. There's so much out there, and it's all completely new to me as well. It's kind of mortified coming in today to sound like an authority on stuff that I am still such a student in. Like, I feel really out of my depths with it at times because there's so much, but again, the silver lining is we're super lucky to have it. You know, I did an interview there with a Swedish guy just a few weeks back, and they don't have much by means of, you know, written mythology, folklore, that kind of thing. And according to that guy, he's a big folklore fan. He runs a podcast on it, Joachim Wilson, and according to him, like, none of his friends in Sweden are into it. He's the only person he knows that's into folklore and mythology and that kind of thing, and he was able to tell me lots about, you know, their fairy faith over there, and there's actually quite a lot of similarities between the two, which is fascinating when you're into, you know, tracing the movement of people over the millennia, like. So talking to him was fascinating, and it was kind of sad to hear that, you know, there's maybe a couple of, he said there was like a nomadic group of people who are like their own culture within Swedish culture, and they would keep a lot of their tales and old traditions and customs. They'd be out herding the cattle still, so they live that nomadic kind of we call it bullying here, but they're constantly moving with their animals and keeping these stories and things like that. So it's great that they have that, but think of all the countries that don't have the written records that we have. So I personally feel like it's kind of my duty to get through as many of them as I can with the time that I have. I probably would still only be kind of scratching the surface by the time I'm done, you know, because the other thing is, as well as having all the source texts, you've constantly people interpreting them. And not just in Ireland, but like you'd be digging up talks from people in Harvard and all that kind of thing. You know, people in other countries who are studying our texts and interpreting them and maybe bringing things into it you wouldn't have thought of. So there's an endless amount of stuff to read. And I think it's just a matter of like finding a thread that you find interesting and just following it and going down after it, following it, till you hit a dead end and then pick another thread and go again.
Thank you. Questions and comments. Thanks so much, Tara. You've been amazing. Absolutely brilliant. I knew you'd be an absolute star, and you were.
Thank you very much,
so
Lisa,
much.
and everybody at Drogheda Library and Louth Library Services for having me.
No,
It was a great talk, great evening. Thank you.